started recording and then go ahead, Faith.
Yeah, so my name is Klinton Davis. I'm a graduate of UNCG and I went to JSNN for my PhD program. My dissertation was roughly controlling zinc oxide morphologies through solvent-driven systems. And using the facilities, I was able to publish a couple papers, and I'm currently at BNNano, which is a company over in Burlington. We make boron nitride nanobarbs. We modify the surface structure of boron nitride nanotubes so that they're more mechanically not driven, but more mechanically viable in real applications, whether it be steels, composites, and or plastics. How I actually got this job was I actually had the opportunity to work with them multiple times throughout JSNN. I'm not sure if Dr. Aubert or the recruiters here still preach this, but when I was coming to this school, I was under the impression that this is a very industry-driven program where students would have interactions with industry all the time. And the idea of this entire facility when it was first founded was specifically to get people into local industry. And so my career was really about making connections and talking to industry people and seeing if there was really any way I can help. Because I'm sure we've all taken Dr. Herr's course at some point or another, but really introductions are highly important, especially when it comes to industry. When you're putting in a resume, you're just another number. But when your resume is handed from someone in industry to HR, it's a completely different story. This is honestly one of the things that I really appreciated about this school. It gave me those opportunities to make connections and just bypass HR in general, which is how I'm here today. And that's kind of my short introduction.
Great, thanks, Clinton. Appreciate you being here. And yeah, so from here, I'll just kind of ask you some questions as a moderator, and then what we'll do is we'll open it up to the audience to ask any other questions that they have. So, so first question is, what skills or knowledge did you learn during the program that you find most useful in your career?
My biggest, so what was most useful in my program, or what was most useful after I graduated that I learned from my program?
You talk about both.
Okay. So it's real. So in my program, I learned that other than make sure to clean everything all the time and hide glassware, it's essentially, no assumption is too basic. Like if you were to read my dissertation, it starts from the very bare bones and I work my way up. Basically, don't give an assumption like a throw over the shoulder. Really think about what that assumption means. Because in some systems, a typical assumption just doesn't apply to you. For instance, this is a very silly example, but it does matter. When you have a piece of glassware, say like a round bottom flask, yes, a round bottom flask is a round bottom flask. But depending on how you clean it, you can modify the surface chemistry of it, whether you clean your glassware through acidic solutions like hydrochloric or basic solutions like sodium hydroxide. That glassware now has either H groups or OH groups, which can affect a synthesis. And while that may seem trivial, glassware is not perfectly flat. it is roughened on the nanoscale. And we all freaking know that nanoscale means surface area. And so now there's an excessive amount of H and OH groups that can certainly make your synthesis inconsistent. It's a very simple assumption that a clean piece of glassware is clean, but not necessarily. That's one example of what I learned that helped me through my dissertation. Now, probably the biggest thing that has helped me when I think back is how much information I was able to acquire just by talking with other people. I have to say 90% of the work that I do at my company has nothing to do with what I did in my PhD. All the knowledge that I gained just by like talking to, say, Dr. Li Feng's group with electrospinning and catalysis with Dr. Quila's group, or even Kyle Nolan with vacuum systems, turbos, ion getters, roughing pumps, and just like magnetic fields and how they drive certain catalytic reactions. Like, for instance, does anyone know how an ion getter works? An ion getter pump? Because I promise you, we use them all the time. But that's just one of those things. And it wasn't just the students or the groups. It was really actually, as maybe some of you know, I was very heavy into the microscopy. I basically lived in the basement. And I had a very, very fortunate experience of just being able to get to know like all the field service engineers and the applications engineers and really get into their head as to why they do certain things and how things work. Was it useful? Not in my dissertation. Was it useful at work? Absolutely. So really the main point is, it may not seem relevant now, but you would be impressed how relevant certain pieces of information are outside of your dissertation.
Great, thank you for that. Next question is, when and how did you begin navigating or courting career options?
So when you ask that, are you saying what drove my decision, or are you asking, did I have like this ideal job in my head?
Basically, like, what was the process like? Just as far as,
How I got the job?
as far as from like initially what you were thinking you wanted to do and how that changed, and just based on how the job market works and several other factors involved, like
Okay. This is where it starts to get kind of funny for me. So everyone knows a PhD sucks. And if it doesn't suck, you're not doing it right. Like I was probably putting in 60 to 80-hour work weeks, sometimes 100. They were never fun. So while you're in lab, just grinding, whether it be a synthesis, whether it be long imaging sessions, whether it's nasty code that you have to fix, I started to think to myself, I do not care about money. I want a job where hours are nice. And so if you ever talk to people at, say, Intel or IBM, Micron, Applied Materials, in fact, Como and Rama are actually really good examples over at Applied Materials. They actually gave a presentation roughly 3 years ago. And they said, you have a set of tasks and you get those tasks done. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Now, they obviously didn't say it, but we all know what they were alluding to. And so that was kind of my thought process when I was trying to look for jobs. Although I didn't really look very hard when I'm being really honest about this. So as I mentioned, So while I was thinking about this, a lot of companies who found out that I graduated approached me. Um, and these were companies that I actually had done work for while I was doing my PhD. There's actually a surprising amount of companies around here if you actually look, and there's a lot of people that come, at least there used to be a lot of industry people that would come here to do like imaging work, spectroscopy. And I always made it a point to introduce myself, ask what they're doing, if there was anything I could do to help. And so I got job offers from, say, Goulston, Evonik, Elevate Textiles, which I did an internship with, actually. A little side note, the reason I got that internship is the research scientist came to JSNN looking for someone who could do imaging. As it would turn out, I was the person that actually trained him on SEM initially. And so he hired me instantly through the internship. But just little things like that. And then I remember specifically, I was talking to my boss, who's now my current boss, Mark Edmond, who works over at BNNano. And we were just talking about music, and I happened to say that, I'm looking for jobs. He's like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, they get some paperwork arranged and said, hey, we have a position open. Do you want a job? I mean, obviously there were two interview-like things afterwards, but overall I said yes. How they explained the job was you have to wear multiple hats. It is a startup company. We've been around for 5 years, actually. And some of you might like this. At a startup company, you don't do the same thing every day for 5 years. It's not like a PhD program at all. It's actually so refreshing when you're scrambling, figuring out how to do things week by week. It's really, really cool. And that was honestly another thing when thinking about jobs is what kind of job does not pigeonhole myself or become monotonous like a PhD program. And the way they describe things, I thought it was the perfect fit. So that's where I am today.
That's great. And yeah, I guess it's just kind of a follow-up question to that. I guess as far as these industry people that you saw around here, were there any, I guess, industry folks that you worked with directly through your advisor? Like, was there any of that?
I gotta say, I love Hamali to death. She is one of the best advisors I've ever had. And I've had like 4, undergrad through PhD. She gave me a lot of freedom. As long as I got my work done, she allowed me to do whatever she wanted, whatever I wanted. And I'll always appreciate that about her. But the answer is no. No, it was always, I finish my work, and then in my spare time, if you have spare time, help out industry. And that's kind of how I approached things.
Gotcha. Okay, and so what do you think employers look for in new graduates, just from your perspective?
So one thing you'll definitely learn when applying for jobs is unless you have 10 years experience in that exact field, no one's ever going to hit all the check boxes on that job application. The main thing is to be, well, first and foremost, find someone that that works there to give your resume to, whether it be LinkedIn or whatever. Just make sure it's not out of the blue. Second is, oh wow, I forgot the question already.
It's
What was I
okay.
talking about?
Yeah, I can repeat it. So what do you think employers look for in new graduates?
Okay, so so in my job specifically, they were looking for someone that was very well acquainted with the facilities here. So my boss was the one that did all the characterization and the analysis, but at a startup company, and him being chief of operations, that really should not be his job. So they were looking for someone in particular to do characterization, analysis, and synthesis and modifications to what we make. And that's my job now. So obviously, in my case, knowing a lot of instruments, how they work, and what possibilities there are, depending on what you're doing in the lab, was very vital for me in getting the job that I have today. Now, in my other job interviews, I'll give an example where I was not able to hit all the check boxes. Elevate Textiles offered me a job that is polyethylene, polypropylene, nylon, and we were doing functionalization, additive manufacturing, and specifically my internship was about using insect repellent technology on fabric for a 4th generation product. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I was working on zinc oxide and solvent driven systems. These were nothing alike. But I think the reason they hired me was not only because I made an introduction and I helped them with their stuff before and I did good work, but also it's just when you have a conversation, be excited about it, like smile, do a little bit of research beforehand. For those of you not familiar with Book It Lab, I remember in particular, I would go through like the SEM bookings and seeing what industry folk were there. And so I would always, to put it in a way, it was stalking. Because I wanted to talk to industry people because those are the people that were going to hire me after I completed my PhD. And so I would do a little bit of research on their company. I would talk to Kyle. I would talk to Steven. I would talk to the staff here to get a general idea of what they were doing. And then, maybe 15 minutes before they're prepping their sample, I happened to walk in the door and I start a conversation. And, I hit all the check marks on, what their research is. I knew a little bit about what they were doing, and I was really excited about it. Anything was exciting that wasn't my PhD at the moment. Like I said, 5 years of dissertation work is a chore, is a good word to say. And so that's honestly what I did in my spare time. I stalked industry people, for lack of a better phrase, and did a little bit of research and just had a conversation with them.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm not saying that's the most appropriate way, but that's what I do.
Whatever words you can muster up, right?
Exactly.
So how did you differentiate yourself from others?
Thinking back, as I mentioned, how the school was supposed to work is students would have opportunities to meet industry people, and industry people would like you, and then they would hire you, building local economic growth. But it's hilarious because at JSNN, how many people do you see working with industry? Exactly. So that was a little bit of a letdown, which is really why I came here in the first place. I wanted to be part of the industry and part of a collaboration with industry, but there was never an opportunity to. No, I can't say that completely. Perhaps I just took the wrong avenues into persuading professors into, or maybe I didn't have the right connections at the time to spark collaboration with industry so they could possibly fund me for my research. But your question about how I differentiated myself, I never saw a single other student do what I did. I didn't see people talk to industry. I didn't see people offer a helping hand to people that they were unaware of. They were really just stuck on their computers and their research, which, you know, in a PhD, that's a good thing. But it kind of showed like they weren't aware that, and this may be a tad controversial, a degree means nothing if you can't get a job from it. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So yeah, to my understanding and my observation, I was the only one talking to people with industry and trying to go out of my way to help them.
Mhm. And so I guess kind of follow up with that, like when you spend so much time, you know, in the lab, just working 60, 80 hours a week, you know, I think a lot of times companies are looking for what makes people stand out, right? Um, and so, you know, what can you kind of do during, or I guess what advice do you have for PhD students now, you know, about, you know, making yourself stand out outside of your work, you know?
Let's see. How to stand out outside of your PhD. Well, I know one thing that I was very conscious about was like 2017 through 2020. I started to realize like looking like a bum, talking to the industry people who are like in nice get-ups, kind of looks kind of shabby. And so what I'd end up doing is I started wearing collared shirts, long sleeves. I'd actually start to care about my appearance a little bit. It's minor and it's sad, but appearances do matter. Now, as far as, I don't think I have a good answer to that one. Uh, I really don't think I do.
It's okay. It's a tough question. Yeah. Um, okay, I got, all right, one, here's another one. So, what is something you wish you did differently as a student, or a piece of advice you would give yourself?
Don't go into a PhD not knowing why you need a PhD. Does that resonate with some people?
Short and sweet. Anything else on that, or just?
You know, it's interesting. Until I got my job, there was a real thought process of, why do I need this again? Um, I'm not going to speak too much about this, but it is important to know why you need a PhD. And there's a lot of instances where you simply do not need one. Like, so for instance, 5 years is a very long time. I could have gotten multiple promotions. I could have advanced my job title. I could have done lots of things. But I would probably still, I probably would have made more money if we're comparing 5 years experience, master's degree versus fresh grad PhD. I would have had a better job title. I would have had more work experience in the real world, because there's a lot of job titles or job applications say 5 years real world experience, and PhDs do not count. Now, in my particular situation, yes, I needed a PhD. And through the experiences that I gained through my PhD is why I was hired. But I'm simply just saying it's not always necessary.
Um, I guess I'll kind of stretch this out a little bit and, just, I guess, like, what about the PhD in terms of just really stretching your ability to think and, just improvise maybe in some ways. How does that help in terms of working, for a startup company? Because I imagine, like you said, startup companies have a lot of things, not figured out, right? So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, like, how, maybe just the experience of going through this really difficult, program, kind of helps you to be able to, critically think and, be sort of, I guess, like, mature in your role, in the role that you're in.
I see what you're getting at. So there's a very funny saying where in your last 6 months, you could probably do your PhD all over again within those 6 months, because you're much more knowledgeable, you have all the information, and you know exactly what experimental parameters, what to and not to do. I am a huge advocate of failure is still an option in a PhD program, as long as you learn something from it. And once again, when you talk to a lot of people, you learn about a lot of failures. And so while your experimental technique is certainly improved, it's the thought process on why would things fail versus how can things succeed. It's a little bit different in thinking, but it does matter. Just the culmination of all that experience. I mean, speaking for myself, like, I failed a lot in the lab. I was a physicist in what was Molly's title? Synthetic organic chemist. I was working with a synthetic organic chemist, and I was a master's of physics. I had a lot of things to learn, and I was going to fail a lot, but thank God she took me in. But anyways, no, culmination of failures lead up to experiences. That's what I honestly think a PhD program should honestly be about.
Awesome. Thank you. I guess I'll just ask one more question here before I open it up to the audience. Now I know you haven't, I guess, had roles in some of the bigger companies to compare this with, but how would you say the freedom is in working for a startup, as far as, like, benefits, perks, timing, like, how are you micromanaged or not micromanaged? Like, how is that
All
experience?
depends on, and that's why I was very comfortable accepting the job at a startup with BNNano. I know their personalities. I've met both of them multiple times. I've done their work multiple times. I've seen how their product works. So that might be slightly different. To give you a bit of a background story, both my bosses worked for Cree, which is the LED company. In fact, they're the first people that invented the blue LED, as a little bit of a background. And they described to me their work environments of just absolute yelling and high turnaround rates through employees. Now, the people that succeeded like they did, you know, they all got very fat checks, but they were still working 60, 80 a week. In fact, my boss said he was never allowed to turn his phone off. That was not allowed. And if you ever talk to people at Intel or IBM, things like that, it's roughly the same thing, if not exactly the same thing. So when they told me they do not believe in any of that horse manure, I was very excited about that. And so there is a lot of flexibility. There's some days where I work 6 hours a day. I get off at 2:30. I play a round of golf. Life is great. And then other days, I'll work 16-hour days because it's necessary. There's a lot of give and take at my job. In fact, yesterday, I'm starting a second shift schedule where I'm working from 1 to 9, actually, because it's necessary. Now, it's short term, but like I said, there's still a lot of flexibility. Like, I'm not getting overworked. I am not getting yelled at. And I knew that going in because I had met them. So when you're interviewing, make sure you don't just read about the job. Make sure you read the people. Like, do they have, puffy eyes? Do they look very tired? Is their hair combed? Or are they in a rush? Like these are signs that a lot of people miss because they get too excited about a salary and a big fat number and the benefits. But I promise you, it's not worth it.
Great. Thank you so much, Clinton. So yeah, I'm going to open it to the audience now. So anyone else who wants to ask Clinton any questions, feel free.
Hi, I can ask a question.
Okay, Selena, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm in the lab. It's loud in here. You talked a lot about courting industry when they came here. Was there a certain point in your research where you felt confident enough to have those type of conversations? I guess I'm asking, like, did you wait to be introduced to those persons, or did you just initiate the conversation on your own?
That's a grand question. As you all know, I am very good friends with Kyle. In the very beginning, Kyle was actually the one that was introducing me to all these people. And as a little backstory, everyone knows, well, everyone is going to know right now that I love electron microscopes. I think they are the neatest thing in the world, just in terms of how they work. Absolutely love them to death. Ever since I got introduced to one. And so I would actually shadow Kyle through multiple training sessions, and I just pestered him asking all the things about it until I was able to take over his training sessions, actually. And for those of you that don't know, there was such a thing as service assignments, where you would do certain tasks like for 20 hours a week to justify your pay as a grad student because we don't teach. And so I just kind of took that opportunity to learn as much as I could. And I'd start within a couple, maybe a month or two, he let me start training. Then after a couple more sessions, I was fully independent in training, which leads to why I was able to train the person that hired me for my internship. But the short answer is, in the beginning, Kyle and Steven would actually introduce me to all these industry people. But once I started to be a little bit more advanced in my research and, start being a tad more professional in how things were done, I would just start introducing myself to industry. It took a lot of time, but I think it was worth it. And another thing is, my dissertation was focused on morphology of zinc oxide particles. So SEM was already a part of my dissertation. So that helped a lot.
I have a question.
All right, go ahead and shoot.
Yeah, did any of your network, did it come from like conferences? Did you present any conferences and go to any cool stuff like that?
I mean, I did. But what ended up, there's no downside to going to a conference. In fact, I would recommend going to conferences, not doing posters. Do a poster once and let that be your first and only time. Because I'll tell you right now, I remember going to a conference at MRS over in Orlando, I think it was. I actually went with Dr. Olson's group as I'm thinking about this. We presented posters, everything was fine and dandy. People approached us and then they just walked past us. Okay, fine. That's how it always is. I remember a very specific talk about perovskite solar cells, where you had this undergraduate give a beautiful 20-minute presentation. She knew her stuff. She answered all the questions about it. And then when she ended and questioning was done, and she was the final person, which I would always recommend be the final person at the end of a session. And here's why. Every 95% of the professors got up and walked directly at her. And I was hearing things like, were you thinking about a postdoc? And then you hear, I'm just an undergraduate. They goes, you have a spot in my lab if you want it. So the moral of this story is, if you want to do education, give as many talks as possible. Show that you're able to present. Show that you can represent yourself. Show that you are competent in front of an audience. It will get you places. As for me, I wasn't very interested in postdocs. So, and also the other nice thing about giving a talk, it's 20 minutes. And then conferences are basically vacations at that point. Versus a poster, you got to stand there for multiple days, keep track of a poster. It's not fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I believe it's Shibin.
Yes, doctor. Thank you for all the cool advices. I really enjoyed it. So my question is, how different do you think is the real world from school? So we have research and we have real world. So how different is that? It would be great if you can give us an experience that you had, that would help differentiate these.
Okay. I have a very specific example. So when your advisor asks you something to do, typically, how long does it take you to do? Like say, do a synthesis in the lab or write a program. I'm sorry, I don't actually know what you do, but in general, like how often and how fast can you get that task done?
For me, it would be 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, 1 to 2 days. Otherwise, you get fired. Okay. That's the
That helps. Thank you.
so, and maybe something to think about with your advisors is maybe you should think of them not as advisors, but bosses, because at the end of the day, they're writing you a recommendation letter. You want to leave a positive experience, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem.
Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It was definitely helpful, and I like your transparency. So my question, do you have any advice for someone who's maybe not so interested in industry, but more so academics?
As much as I hate to say this, papers are the currency in academia. My experience is, okay, here's a good example. Depending on what you do for your dissertation and what area you go to, like say polymer chemistry, for instance, you change a functional group, write a paper, change another functional group, you can write another paper. Cool. But say your projects are very TEM focused, all that polymer stuff, you're expected to be first author, maybe second author, okay, whatever. But if your work is very heavy on TEM, you make that very apparent in your resume, and quite legitimately, if you're like a full TEM person, you should be on like 20 papers. Like you should be imaging everything for other people's groups just to get your name out there with like a full section written out, like these are the lattices, this is the diffraction pattern, this is what we can tell about the morphology, the dimensions, things of that nature. Yeah, I would say for academics in particular, obviously know as much as you can about your research, and papers are currency.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Hillary is the next hand I saw.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering if you're looking for a certain kind of culture that you're talking about, where like you are allowed to turn off your phone. Is there something that you should look for before you get to the interview stage when you're kind of just putting out feelers and seeing what's out there, like in the job description?
Okay, so there are some times where that's just simply not possible. Now, if these are good interviews, and they typically will be, I've never had a situation where it was just you interview with HR and you're given an acceptance letter. That's not how it works with scientists or engineers. There's roughly 2 or 3 interviews at minimum or most. And actually, I remember specifically doing a 6-hour interview with Corvo, because they really wanted to make sure that not only, and this was at Corvo, I started at 9 a.m., went through multiple departments, talked to all the failure analysis engineers, went out to lunch, And then I basically had a, what do you know session kind of interview on circuit diagrams, MOSFETs, like what are your talents? So maybe what I can draw from that is if you are doing interviews and you have the ability to meet them, I would highly suggest so in a social situation, whether it be lunch, just to get a feel of what their personalities are like. And in all actuality, if there is just simply a one interview and you get hired, I would, I think that would be a red flag for me. It just simply means that you're just another person that they don't typically care about, as long as you're able to get the job done. Yeah, I think that's what I would want to say.
All right. I have another question, if that's all right.
No problem.
So I'm in a more bio lab and we don't use the core facilities. So I was wondering if you had any recommendations for networking, considering those things.
Well, I know Dr. Josephs. I know he loves his research. And I know he loves very regimented schedules, but also remember, yeah, this is your PhD and your experience. Maybe there's a way he can get in contact with someone like LabCorp, where you can have a summer project that you can be working on. There are a lot of biotech companies around. But yeah, it is. And I do know that they do post like internships. They post internships online. I do know that. Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult. But I think it is a good thing for you to have a conversation with your advisor about that, though, to see what they know.
Thank you.
I believe Juvaria was next.
Hey, Glenn. It was a great session. Thank you so much. So my question is, as a person who did a lot of work outside your PhD during your graduate term, what would be your advice to prioritize those tasks? Because as a PhD student, I have to work my own project. Sometimes as a super user, I have to run samples for my colleagues. And sometimes I have to help my professor with something else, or maybe like a collaboration from outside the university and things like that. So you have did a lot of networking sessions and did a lot of work apart from your PhD, right? So how would you prioritize these tasks?
Who is the most important person in your life?
Mm-hmm.
You are.
So like, for example, sometimes you said, even if you're working with industry, you never know what's going to help in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So like in that kind of tricky situation, how do you choose? I mean, of course, when you look at your experiment in your PhD, so you might think that might weigh more, but maybe it might not. Like in that kind of tricky situation, like do you have any formula or like any kind of idea why do you choose to network with a person other than doing, something related to your thesis at that particular time?
Oh, I see what we're asking right now. Okay. Typically when you have a conversation with a person, you can generally get an idea of if they actually know what they're talking about or not. And this is something that comes with experience. I'm not sure what everyone else's experiences are, but I do happen to remember talking not just to JSNN students, but chemistry, biology, physics at both institutions and at other institutions at conferences. And you can typically get a rough idea on whether you should network with them or not and whether they're useful. Does that kind of answer your question?
I believe so. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions? I suppose it is hitting that hour mark where people just run out of things to talk and think about. Yes, Shibin?
Can I go with one, if you don't mind?
Not at all.
All right. So you said that, that networking experiences, making connections is pretty important. So I was just wondering, because you actually networked and connected with people who were actually using a lot of spectroscopy.
Mhm.
So my question is, have you met engineers who actually work on spectroscopy instruments and who are like the guys who actually make prototypes, like not just using the spectroscopy instruments, but guys who can actually make a prototype, make some changes to the current existing microscope. So like, have you met those guys who actually like, make new stuff and kind of like new patterns, stuff like that?
Are you talking from an instrument point of view or from a, like, you make a part and you analyze point of view?
Well, like industrial, like coming up with a new technique kind of thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like the invention of like a 2-photon microscope technique or, okay. No, those are very special people. They get paid lots of money. They do not travel anywhere.
Okay.
They are known as the experts.
Okay.
And yeah, those people are very hard to meet. However, I will go ahead and say, you know what? I think this will be, unless someone has another question, I'll give it 10 more seconds and I'll do a closing remark, I guess. Okay. So I will go ahead and say, it's actually really impressive who you meet outside of school. Now, some of you may know I enjoy beer, and it's actually really impressive who you can meet at a bar. I actually got offered roughly 3 jobs. One in particular was Ruger, which is actually the gun company, for materials characterization. Just because I was a regular at one of the bars, I knew him and we started talking and we became pretty good friends. I still keep in contact with him actually. But I will say, throughout my entire PhD, I can just think, make sure you have a social life. It's nearly impossible to get through this program without friends. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have very good friends and we all supported each other through this situation that we call a PhD. Yeah, and I'll always thank them for that. I still keep in touch with them to this day. And I really do treasure it. But yeah, remember, you are the most important person in your life. And it's okay to have a little fun, even though it doesn't seem like fun.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for your time, Clinton. Really appreciate you, joining us and giving all your really valuable advice. That is definitely just very helpful for all of us. So thank you for that.
Of course, it was an
and,
absolute pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you everyone who showed up for coming. And we'll have another speaker series on Monday with a couple folks from Intel. So stay tuned for that. That'll be in the auditorium.
Make sure you ask how many. Make sure you ask how many hours they work.
All right. Thank you so much, Klinton. Have a good one now.
All right, everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.